There is a moment in every healthcare professional's life that changes everything. It's not the day you receive your diploma, nor your first successful surgery, nor even the instant a patient grabs your hand and tells you that you saved their life. The moment that changes everything is different. It is silent. It is disturbing. It is that instant when you realize that the system you blindly believed in was letting something enormous slip through, something that was silently destroying the lives of millions of people, and nobody was talking about it with the urgency the subject deserved. I spent years studying neurology, years inside offices, hospitals, laboratories, years listening to patients describing the same symptoms with different words. Doctor, I keep forgetting things. I can't concentrate the way I used to. I feel like my mind is getting slower. And for a long time, I responded the same way I learned in medical school. I said it was natural aging, that it was stress, that it was lack of sleep. I prescribed supplements, gave general guidance, and referred patients to other specialists. But a day came when I could no longer accept those answers. Not when the numbers in front of me were devastating. Not when I saw with my own eyes what this disease does to a family. Not when I understood that much of what was happening to those people had an origin far more concrete, far more traceable, and far more preventable than the conventional medical system was willing to admit. This investigation began with a patient. I will call her Mrs. Maria, because her story is, in truth, the story of millions of people around the world. She was 67 years old when she arrived at my office accompanied by her daughter. She walked slowly, with that slightly lost look I had already learned to recognize. Her daughter told me that her mother had started forgetting small things about 3 years earlier. First it was the keys, then the names of neighbors, then appointments. And then, in a moment, the daughter described with a trembling voice, Mrs. Maria had looked at her over breakfast and asked who she was. I examined Mrs. Maria. I ordered the standard tests. The results confirmed what I already suspected: Alzheimer's disease at a moderate stage. But what deeply unsettled me was not the diagnosis itself. It was the story behind it. Because when I started investigating that woman's lifestyle habits, what I found was something that haunted me for months. Mrs. Maria was a person who, throughout her entire life, had been considered healthy. She didn't smoke. She rarely drank. She was not sedentary. But there was something she did every single day, for decades, never imagining that it could be slowly destroying her brain. She consumed sugar, a lot of sugar, coffee sweetened 5 times a day, cream-filled cookies for her afternoon snack, soda at lunch, cake on weekends. Nothing that seemed abnormal by average dietary standards, nothing that any doctor had ever flagged as a serious risk to brain health. And it was there, in that office facing a woman who no longer recognized her own daughter, that I decided I needed to go deeper. I needed to understand what science truly knew about the relationship between what we eat and what happens inside our brains. What I found over the following months was, at the same time, alarming and enlightening. Alzheimer's is today one of the fastest-growing diseases in the world. It is estimated that more than 55 million people live with some form of dementia globally, and Alzheimer's accounts for approximately 60 to 70% of those cases. The numbers are equally alarming worldwide. Millions of people are living with the disease, and that number is expected to triple by 2050 if nothing changes significantly. Statistically, almost everyone has or will have someone close to them affected by this condition. What disturbed me was not just the numbers. It was the trajectory of the disease. Alzheimer's does not appear suddenly. It develops silently for decades before the first symptoms become evident. Researchers today believe that the brain changes that characterize the disease, the accumulation of beta-amyloid protein plaques and the tau tangles inside neurons, can begin up to 20 years before diagnosis. 20 years. That means that while a person is living their apparently normal life, eating, working, connecting with others, something silent and progressive may already be happening inside their brain. When I began diving into the scientific literature with that question in mind, one thing became very quickly evident. Brain inflammation is at the center of almost everything. The human brain, despite being protected by the blood-brain barrier, is extraordinarily sensitive to systemic inflammatory processes. When the body enters a state of chronic low-grade inflammation, that silent inflammation that doesn't hurt, that doesn't show up in conventional tests, but that erodes tissues over time, the brain suffers along with it. And what causes this state of chronic inflammation? There are several factors: sedentary lifestyle, sleep deprivation, chronic stress, exposure to pollutants. But one of the most powerful triggers, and at the same time one of the most ignored in conversations about brain health, is diet. Specifically, the excessive and prolonged consumption of refined sugar and ultra-processed foods. I know that may sound like just another generic warning about sugar, but what science reveals goes far beyond sugar is bad for you. The mechanism by which excess sugar can contribute to the development of Alzheimer's is specific, documented, and frankly disturbing. I will explain it as clearly as possible, because understanding this mechanism is essential for the choices we make every day to truly make sense. The human brain is an extraordinarily demanding organ from an energy standpoint. It represents only about 2% of body weight, yet it consumes approximately 20% of all the energy the body produces. The preferred energy source for neurons is glucose. But, and this is the crucial point, the way the brain uses glucose depends on a fine and precise mechanism involving insulin. For decades, it was believed that the brain was an insulin-independent organ. We know today that is not true. The brain has insulin receptors in several regions, especially in areas linked to memory, such as the hippocampus. Insulin plays a fundamental role not only in the energy metabolism of neurons, but also in protecting against the formation of amyloid plaques, in regulating inflammatory processes within brain tissue, and in synaptic plasticity. That is, the brain's capacity to form and consolidate new connections, which is the physical basis of memory. When we chronically consume excess refined sugar, the pancreas is forced to produce ever-increasing amounts of insulin to handle the glucose overload in the bloodstream. Over time, the body's cells, including brain cells, begin to develop resistance to this hormone. It is as if the receptors, overloaded by years of excessive stimulation, stop responding adequately to insulin signal. Neurons, deprived of efficient insulin signaling, begin to struggle to metabolize glucose normally. They become, literally, starved for energy. And when neurons are chronically deprived of energy, they begin to malfunction and, eventually, to die. Furthermore, insulin resistance in the brain appears to actively favor the accumulation of beta-amyloid protein, exactly the substance that forms the famous plaques that are the hallmark of Alzheimer's disease. Insulin normally helps regulate the enzymes that break down this protein. When insulin signaling is compromised, that cleansing process becomes less efficient and plaques begin to accumulate. This is why researcher Suzanne de la Monte, from Brown University in the United States, proposed the term that many researchers now use informally: type 3 diabetes. This term is not an official diagnosis, but it powerfully captures the essence of what science is revealing: that Alzheimer's may, in many cases, be a manifestation of insulin resistance occurring specifically in the brain. This does not mean every diabetic will develop Alzheimer's, nor that every Alzheimer's patient had diabetes, but it means that the metabolic processes that lead to type 2 diabetes, especially the excessive consumption of refined sugar and ultra-processed foods over decades, may be actively contributing to the brain deterioration that culminates in this devastating disease. And the deeper I went into this investigation, the more evident it became that the problem was not just sugar in isolation. It was the overall pattern of modern eating, built over decades by an industry that prioritized profit far above the health of the people consuming its products. I began examining what else is inside the ultra-processed foods we consume daily, and what I found was a list of components that, when seen together, represent a systematic assault on brain health. High fructose corn syrup, Present in sodas, industrialized juices, ready-made sauces, and hundreds of other products, is particularly problematic. Fructose is metabolized almost exclusively by the liver, and its excessive consumption is strongly associated with the development of hepatic insulin resistance and elevated triglycerides. Studies in animal models showed that fructose-rich diets lead to significant memory deficits, as well as alterations in brain markers associated with Alzheimer's disease. There are also trans fats, still present in some industrialized products, that have shown in studies an association with accelerated cognitive decline. The chemical additives, artificial colorings, synthetic preservatives. Each of these elements, in isolation, may seem harmless in the quantities present in a single product. But the problem is that we don't eat a single product. We eat dozens of them, every day, over decades. And the brain accumulates that impact year after year. A study published in JAMA Internal Medicine, following more than 10,000 people over several years, found a significant association between the consumption of ultra-processed foods and the decline of cognitive functions. Another study, published in the European Journal of Nutrition, showed that every 10% increase in the proportion of ultra-processed foods in the diet was associated with a 25% higher risk of cognitive impairment. We are talking about a robust relationship, replicated across different populations in different countries with different methodologies. Science is saying something important, and we need to listen. The food industry is one of the most profitable in the world, and ultra-processed foods are the products with the highest profit margins within that industry. They are engineered, and I use that word deliberately, to create compulsive consumption patterns. The precise combination of sugar, salt, fat, and flavor additives is calculated to trigger the brain's reward circuits in the same way as addictive substances. Researchers at Yale University published studies showing that the consumption of highly processed foods activates the same brain regions activated by drugs such as cocaine and heroin. Refined sugar specifically demonstrated in animal studies the ability to cause dependency patterns with withdrawal symptoms when abruptly removed from the diet. It was not just that people didn't know these foods were harmful to the brain. It was that these foods were specifically formulated to make it very difficult to stop consuming them. The industry created products that literally hijack the brain's reward mechanisms, while simultaneously funding research that minimizes their harmful effects and investing billions in marketing that associates them with moments of happiness, family, and celebration. And so, generation after generation, the pattern repeats itself. Children grow up consuming these products as if they were normal. Adults grow old without ever having received the information that what they put in their mouths every day may be silently compromising the most important organ in their body. The good news, and it exists, and it is genuine, is that the human brain has an extraordinary capacity for recovery when treated with respect. Neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to reorganize itself and create new connections, is real and responds in measurable ways to lifestyle changes. The first and most impactful step is to drastically reduce the consumption of refined sugar. It doesn't need to be a total and abrupt elimination. But a conscious and progressive reduction already produces measurable effects. Research shows that in just 10 days of a diet with significant sugar reduction, inflammation markers in the blood begin to fall. Within a few weeks, insulin sensitivity begins to improve. Alongside that, replacing ultra-processed foods with real foods is one of the most powerful interventions any person can make for their brain health. Fatty fish rich in omega-3, dark leafy greens, nuts and seeds, extra virgin olive oil, berries and turmeric all have growing evidence of neuroprotective properties. Physical activity is another absolutely irreplaceable pillar. Moderate aerobic exercise increases the production of BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which works like a fertilizer for neurons. A study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences showed that 6 months of regular aerobic exercise increased hippocampal volume in participants over 60 years old. The hippocampus, which normally shrinks with aging, actually grew. Sleep is also essential. During deep sleep, the glymphatic system actively removes toxic proteins accumulated during the day, including beta amyloid. A single night of total sleep deprivation already raises levels of that protein in measurable ways. Sleep is not a luxury. For the brain, it is a nightly cleansing essential to its survival. When I went back to thinking about Mrs. Maria, I found myself imagining what could have been different. If, 20 years earlier, when she was middle-aged and the process was perhaps only just beginning, someone had sat down with her and said, "Look, what you eat directly affects the health of your brain. That cookie, that soda, that sugar you consume every day may be igniting a silent inflammatory process that, over the years, can compromise your memory." Would she have made different choices? Probably yes, because people don't choose to hurt themselves when they understand that they are hurting themselves. The problem was never a lack of willpower. The problem was the lack of clear, honest, and accessible information. The brain you have today is the result of the choices you made over the last 20 years. The brain you will have over the next 20 years is being built by the choices you make today. That is both a responsibility and an enormous opportunity. Science is not asking for perfection. It is asking for awareness. It is asking us to look at what we put on our plates with just a little more attention. Because in the end, everything we are, our memories, our emotions, our capacity to love, to create, to connect, exists inside that 1.4 kilogram organ we carry in our heads, and it deserves for us to fight for it. Small changes, made consistently over time, have a transformative power that most people deeply underestimate. Reducing sugar just a little this week, replacing one ultra-processed product with a piece of fruit tomorrow, walking for 30 minutes, sleeping 1 more hour, reading a book. Each of these choices is sending a signal to your brain. I take care of you. You matter. And the brain, treated with that respect, will respond. With greater clarity, with sharper memory, with a mind that ages with dignity instead of fading before its time. If this video made sense to you, subscribe to the channel right now, hit the notification bell, and join us every week. Because information like this is what can truly change your story.